audience, I concede that Peter is one of my dearest friends. It's embarrassing. And I do want you, like in introducing yourself, to tell us about Michael Moore and your experience with him, because Michael Moore doesn't really like you, and it's just terrible. That must mean you're a horrible person. He sort of considers you the worst person on the planet. So tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about Michael Moore.
Sure. I got to Miami in 1993, originally from Chicago. Came from a working-class neighborhood. Family did a lot of real estate in areas that ultimately blossomed and turned into very desirable locations. Anybody who knows Chicago would know a neighborhood just north of the United Center and or around a place called the Wicker Park, things like that. So my family dabbled in real estate. I kind of grew up around it. Came to Miami in 1993 to be a financial journalist. Came down here. I went through what I call the E&E, Experienced and Exploited. I got paid nothing, but I got access to a variety of different people, and basically did journalism for a grand total of about 17 years, of which about 5 of them I was, let's say, freelancing. I was doing my current gig, but at the same time, the Miami Herald asked me to write a monthly column, and then that turned into twice a month. They wanted me to write even more often, but I just couldn't handle it. And effectively for the last 10, 11 years, I've been focusing on mining data. They call it big data today, but effectively what we do is we go through public records. We use the information to sort of identify opportunities. Same way a stockbroker, if you will look at how things are trading and where the opportunities are, and then put their investors into opportunities. So that's effectively what I do. I've now parlayed that into a variety of different issues, all related to data, everything from expert witness assignments when I work on one side of a lawsuit, which is, you always know when a market's going sideways because there's a lot of expert witness work because everybody's suing everybody because they lost their ass. Whoops. Can I say ass? And then the other aspect is
go ahead.
I use the information to take people on bus tours. I was watching TMZ. I'm a big fan of TMZ. And I see TMZ is stolen my idea. Now they're doing TMZ bus tours in Hollywood. So if you want to see celebrities, you go and you Hollywood, you go on a TMZ tour. And if you want to see condos and distressed opportunities, you look me up and you look at condos in South Florida.
Nice. Okay, so tell us, why does Michael Moore have such a low opinion of you?
Oh, Michael Moore. I guess because I have a capitalistic approach to real estate. During the last go-around, our last cycle in South Florida, and understand, in Silicon Valley, you make technology. In South Florida, we make condos. So we do condos better than anyone else, just like Silicon Valley does technology better than anyone else. So during our last real estate cycle, which began in 2003, there was some irrational exuberance, if I can steal that quote from the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. There was some irrational exuberance, plus probably a little bit of dirty money that was inflating real estate prices here. Too much got built, and the market collapsed. And when it collapsed, there were opportunities for those who had cash and were sort of open to risk as long as the reward was big. And they came in and they started purchasing. And I was one of the groups that was using data to go ahead and identify the opportunities and work with Wall Street funds and family offices, which are basically really wealthy families that hire people to go in and manage their assets. And I was working with university endowment funds. I was working with hospitals. I don't know if you know this, but hospitals actually have funds earmarked. So when there's a downturn, they can go in and buy dirt or land relatively cheap and then look to build clinics and other things in the future. So even hospitals are opportunists. So Michael Moore doesn't necessarily like opportunists. So when he was putting together his movie Capitalism, a love story, I was one of the local faces in Miami that he sent a film crew down to follow me around. Initially, everybody thought it was going to be bad for business, and granted, I did get a bunch of email and telephone threats hoping that I got cancer and lymphoma and STDs and a variety of other things, but ultimately what really came of it was a bunch of investors from around the world who basically wanted to help the Miami and the South Florida condo market recover from overbuilding and not enough fires.
Okay, so, but didn't Michael Moore's people call you up initially and not say who they were with? Didn't they sort of pretend, not that I am opposed to a little bit of duplicity in journalism, but generally I'm straightforward unless I'm just going straight out undercover. But didn't they misrepresent themselves, or am I misremembering that?
Yeah, no, it was, you remember it correctly. It was a total hustle, which I would have said the same thing as I said anyways, and if anybody wants to look it up, it's up on YouTube and stuff. But
we're going to put it on the website for sure. It's hilarious.
Well, the hustle was I was approached by a group out of Philadelphia, and they said that they were working on a documentary about the economy, and they wanted to follow me around and look at sort of what I was doing. And understand what I do. I work on the buy side of a transaction. Anybody out there who does real estate, especially in Florida, or if you're looking to buy real estate in Florida, what many people don't understand is when you come to Florida to buy real estate and you have your real estate agent or your realtor or whatever they call themselves taking you around, they actually represent the transaction. So their role is to get the deal done. They don't have any fiduciary, any real responsibility other than a few things to that individual buyer. So people come in and they think that the information they're getting is to benefit them. In reality, it's not. It's to benefit the transaction getting completed. Whether the price is too high, too low, that doesn't necessarily factor in. That's a decision the buyer has to make. So what we did is we said we're not going to represent everybody. We're only going to represent the buyer. So we work on the buy side of the transaction. So our relationship and our responsibility and our fiduciary was only to the buyer, and our job was to go in there and try to beat up the seller and get the best possible price. And it's fully disclosed. There's documents they have to have signed and disclosures you need to make when you're going after one of these deals. So Michael Moore didn't necessarily like that. So he sent a group down here, said they were working on a documentary. They were out of Philadelphia, never mentioned Michael Moore or anything about it, and followed me around, put together the piece, and I didn't hear another word. Lo and behold, I got a client out of, I think it was Berlin, maybe it was Frankfurt. It was somewhere in Germany, unified Germany. So someone in Germany gave me a call. This was before Skype, and basically said, hey, listen, we were at the cinema this weekend, and we saw a preview for the new Michael Moore documentary in which you're going to be featured. And I had no idea, so obviously I wanted to see what was going on. So what we decided to do was to hijack his event. So when the movie opened in South Florida, we went ahead and cut a deal with a local cinema, and we announced we were going to have a screening of the Michael Moore movie the day it opened, and I would be there to shake hands and kiss babies and do things like that. Local media wrote all about it. TV, they had a film crew out, variety of different things, and basically the movie went off, and there was a lot of oohs and ahs and things like that. And, at the end of the day, if you are more on the sensitive side, you probably didn't like me. But if you were on the buy side and looking for a value, because everything we were doing was above board, it was all straightforward. We weren't lying to you or hoodwinking you and saying, come with us and we're going to try to scam you. We were saying, no, this is our job. This is what we're going to do. And lo and behold, it turned into just a ton of business that even to this day, we still get people who bring up the Michael Moore movie, which was going back in time, 2009.
Well, I'm a sensitive type, but I thought it was quite funny personally. And my favorite line, and everybody who's listening to this should definitely go to the website and click on the YouTube video. It's really funny. It's the outtake, or not the outtake, it's the scene of Peter in the movie. But what was your line about vultures that really is, to me, the highlight?
I was asked by I don't know if you'd call it a journalist or documentarian or what you would call it, but I was asked, what's the difference between you and a real vulture? Keeping in mind the name of the company, the flag I fly under is called Condo Vultures. If anybody has any ideas of using the vulture term, you should know that I own the trademarks in the U.S., and I've just re-registered them for another decade. Vultures, real estate vultures, and condo vultures. So that's just a little disclosure. I don't want to have to send you a cease and desist letter. But anyways, the documentarian, if you will, asked me what's the difference between myself and a real vulture, and I said, well, the difference is I guess when a vulture, the animal, and I'm not into science whatsoever, and I'm not a veterinarian, nothing like that. But supposedly when a vulture goes in and eats a carcass and cleans the carcass, it somehow throws up on itself, and therefore it's able to cleanse itself of any of the problems. So I said, the difference between myself and a real vulture is I don't vomit on myself, at least not unless I'm out on a bender.
Well, I love that story. And my son, who I must mention, who you know, Gabriel, is a big fan of yours, and You met him not too long ago, but I told him that story, and he just cracked up. He is the Washington Babylon NFL columnist, by the way, so everybody should check that out too. Okay, so let's keep going. You are, real estate is your business, and you know it better than anybody as far as I can tell. But typically in Miami, when you talk to
but I have to give credit, though. President Donald Trump made some claims during the whole election process that we're all familiar with, that there were big, fat guys who were basically working at 2 a.m, smoking cigarettes and eating fast food and snacks, potato chips and pork rinds, or chicharron, as they call it down here. I use guys like that, and effectively what they do is they go in and they mine data out of public or government sites, and they collect it all, they put it all together. So we had nothing to do with Hillary's emails. We had nothing to do with the Russia probe, none of that type of stuff. What we look at is real estate records, trying to mine the data. Anybody can get their hands on information in Florida because it's a sunshine state, which has very open policies. So you can get that information. The problem is it's so much heavy lifting, no one wants to do it. So a lot of times Wall Street funds or large financial institutions will come to us. We'll go ahead, collect the information, and we'll put it in, deliver it in a presentable format where they can then process it and start to make their own decisions. Sometimes they want insight, sometimes they just want data. So that's what we do. We mine data. We just use the numbers and the information.
Okay, so, later I want to talk to you quickly about baseball because you are a data guy, a numbers guy. So I
love
know
baseball,
exactly.
and so does every banker. If you ever have the opportunity to talk to a banker, chances are, if you don't know how to start a conversation because they can be a little dry, just bring up baseball. And if they're a baseball fan, chances are they're going to be a real banker. And if they're not a baseball fan, chances are they're out there trying to drum up business, doing business development. So that's a good way to kind of figure it out very fast.
Oh, interesting. I never knew that, but that makes sense somehow. We'll get to baseball a little bit later because I've got a few questions about that. But you are sort of famously bearish on the real estate market in Miami, or not all the time. And maybe I think I've got that right. But everybody down here is always talking about, the market is going to go up forever and ever and ever. And, of course, what goes up has to come down. But here, I don't know whether it's through, duplicity or just willful ignorance or what it is. But most people down here, like in Hollywood, they make movies. In New York, there's Wall Street. D.C. is the capital of the swamp, the shit. Whatever. And Miami is...
Hey, how's that draining going, by the way?
Oh, beautifully. I mean, Trump has fixed everything. It's marvelous. So
does that mean the National Audubon Society is a supporter of Trump because he's draining the swamp and he's going to restore the wetlands for, the native species?
You'll have to talk to them about it. I never talk to environmentalists. Can't stand them personally. Everyone who knows me knows I don't like anybody. So I don't like Trump, couldn't stand Hillary. So I'm an equal opportunity hater here. But anyway, I have a question about Trump for you. But before getting there, it's all related to real estate. But why are you, like everybody, is generally bullish in Miami all the time, and you periodically are bearish, and you got a lot of shit for it. What's going on there, and what do you think? What's going on now? Not that I'm asking you to give away your advice for free, but give us a brief overview of what's going on with the market in Miami now, and why you're a rare bear on Miami real estate. So what's going on there?
Well, unfortunately, I look at the data. Most of the people who are out there trying to hustle are talking about real estate. They're not looking at data. They're going by emotion. They're trying to give you a feel-good sense. I'm not going to say that they are affiliated with the Convention and Visitor Bureau of Miami or Enterprise Florida, which does promotion of business development in the state of Florida. But effectively, the concept is amongst many of the people in the industry. And by the way, in 2009, just to give you a concept of how quickly this industry grows when the market's humming, the Miami Association of Realtors had about 25,000 realtors in 2009. If you fast forward to today, 2017, we're looking at 45,000.
Oh, my God.
Now,
that's crazy.
none of these people are paid a salary. They're all independent contractors, so therefore they operate on their own. But that is sort of an indication as to when the market's humming, everybody gets in. Why do people get in? Well, generally speaking, in real estate, and brokers are always concerned about collusion and things like that. You can't set commissions, Federal Trade Commission, things like that. But generally speaking, you look at real estate commissions. So when we were going into this current cycle, and the cycle is typically 7 years, maybe it goes as long as 10 years, but South Florida seems to be always ahead of the curve, and our cycles tend to be about 7 years. So when we were beginning our current cycle, which was in 2011, real estate commissions on existing properties were about 3%. So if I'm a buyer, a buyer agent, I bring you in to purchase a unit. You buy a $100,000 place, which basically would be a cabana or maybe a lot for a mobile home. And I know you have a preference for mobile homes, but if you were to go in and buy one of these lots for $100,000 at a 3% commission, the agent's going to make $3,000 or 3 G's effectively. Well, new construction, which is brand new product, new technology, latest, greatest, hasn't been driven off the lot yet from the car dealership. That new product had a commission of 5%. So $100,000 meant you were going to put $5,000 in your pocket. Now, Miami-Dade County is one of the poorest counties in the United States if you look at the Census Bureau data. It's going to be far below what you're accustomed to, the fat cats are accustomed to in D.C. or New York or anywhere like that. So if I can put $5,000 in my pocket very quickly, chances are I'm going to take a run at it. So fast forward to where we are today. And a lot of times if you want to get a sense of the economy, look at what gas is trading for when you go to gas stations. Just look at the pricing and how it fluctuates. That's really indicative of what's going on in the economy. Well, if you look at real estate commissions, they will give you what's going on. They'll give you a great insight into the state of the real estate market. Why? Because when times are great, developers don't want to pay anything and sellers don't want to pay anything in terms of the outside broker. When times are tough, you raise the commissions. So back in 2011, when we were beginning our cycle, an existing unit or property would sell for a 3% commission, and a new unit, which is going to be higher priced, about 20 to 30% more than existing because, it's the latest and greatest, just like a new car versus a used car. Well, fast forward to today, if I am a broker and I take a buyer in, and again, I don't have a fiduciary to that buyer, I don't have a responsibility other than to be straightforward and other things. If I can put you as a buyer into a new construction unit, I'm going to make 10% today. So that $100,000 property effectively would put 10 G's in my pocket relatively quickly.
Nice.
Yeah, so this is why everybody is so positive. And when people like me come out and just sort of put the numbers out there, the market tends to get discouraged, and people start to think, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay for my food if I can't necessarily sell this vision and this gateway to Latin America concept and the beautiful beaches and the beautiful people and the blah, 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 blah. So that's always where the rub comes. So when somebody comes out with information that is not complimentary or positive for the market, they are called a boogeyman. So you're talking to the boogeyman effectively for South Florida real estate.
Okay, interesting. What about, let's talk about Trump for just a second. You just mentioned Miami being a gateway to Latin America, and of course this is pretty much a Latin and Caribbean city, which is quite cool.
Although I will tell you there's a great divide. If you look at Census Bureau data for Tri-County, South Florida, when people talk about South Florida, they're talking about Miami-Dade, they're talking about Broward County, and they're talking about Palm Beach. So Palm Beach is where Trump's Mar-a-Lago is. And if you talk about Broward, that's where Fort Lauderdale is. And then if you talk about Miami-Dade, that's obviously where downtown Miami and the beaches are. Now, if you look at the 6 million people who are living down here, about 2.5 million or so, 2.7 million, according to census, are going to be in Miami-Dade. You're going to have another 2 million in Broward, and then the remainder will be in Palm Beach County. Now, interesting enough about this whole area, it's about 38% foreign-born. So chances are if somebody in South Florida invites you over for dinner, effectively 1 out of every 3 invitations will be from somebody who is not born in the United States but currently lives here as a resident. Now, what's interesting is when you drill down into the information in Miami-Dade County, which is the largest county by far in the state, you're going to find by population, Jacksonville is the largest city and the largest county based on land mass, but that's a different discussion. But Miami-Dade County is about 51 to 52% foreign-born. So every dinner invitation you get in Dade County, 1 of every 2, the person was born somewhere else. When you go to Broward County, where Fort Lauderdale is, it's going to be about 32% foreign-born, and when you go to Palm Beach County, it'll be about 23% foreign-born. So what you really have here is a great divide. If you were north of Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, which is kind of right in the center, if you're north of there, that is a safe haven, a harbor, if you will, for people who want to be in the United States. They like the United States, and they're not necessarily open to no one speaking English, as they say. Now, if you're south of Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, you're going to get into an area where the people from overseas, whether they're coming from Russia, they're coming from Latin America, the Caribbean, they say Asia, but I'm really skeptical of that, they're going to tend to be south of Fort Lauderdale Airport. So the whole Trump factor is, as the immigration policy has been put in place, and obviously he hasn't been able to accomplish anything because of the objection, there's a real scare and a fright among people from overseas that If they come here, they might get deported. There's deportation squads roaming the street looking to pick people off, things like that. So they're getting skittish. But now when you go north of Fort Lauderdale Airport, where the domestic type of buyer likes to sort of spend time, you're going to find that market is humming, and that's because of the stock market run-up due to the proverbial Trump bump. 23,000 plus on the Dow Jones versus, at south of 19,000 on Election Day.
So Trump's remarks, though, have impacted the market when he, talks about the wall.
Dramatically.
Okay. And what about money laundering? Because that's something I've written about a lot, and I've quoted you in stories over the years. It's always been said, and my direct observations would tend to confirm this, that a lot of dirty foreign money has traditionally poured into Miami. It's not obviously just me. This has been written about extensively, and Treasury Department instituted a special program to more or less monitor Miami. I think it was Miami and New York real estate because of all the dirty foreign money. But
it was Manhattan. Manhattan and Miami-Dade County, the initial rollout, which was about almost 2 years ago, only identified 2 locales in the entire United States. This includes Canada, this includes Puerto Rico, this includes everywhere. The only 2 places were Miami-Dade County as well as Manhattan. And interesting enough, it sounds like Mr. Manafort, who has some issues there, supposedly some of it might be tied to that, but that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, well, I've written a little bit about him, and I know he bought a number of properties with money that probably was laundered. But what about Miami? How much of the market has traditionally been driven by dirty money from abroad, and where is it coming from? Russia, Latin America? I guess it comes from all over, but where is it coming from? And now is there, is it still a big factor in the market? I guess that's a bunch of questions, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the short answer is after September 11th and after the U.S. Patriot Act was put into place and Know Your Customer was ratcheted up in terms of banks and their reporting and a variety of other things, there was a call for first step was for the financial institutions to be deputized and act as a sheriff and to report things to the federal government. Step 2 was supposed to be for jewelers and people in the real estate profession to report things to the government to help identify who the feds ought to be looking at. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you like to play, the real estate aspect and the jewelry aspect, from what I'm aware of, never actually went into place. So what does that mean? That means effectively it's the Wild West. People are running around, running amok, and ultimately there's no real sheriff in town to try to differentiate what's real, what's not real, what's dirty money, what's not dirty money. If you go back and you look at the history of Miami, there was a great documentary called Cocaine Cowboys, which documented the 1970s and 1980s from the people who were basically moving the coke between South America into the United States by way of Miami. And there's a coroner at the time who was quoted saying he knew or he suspected that most of the new condo towers that were going up in the Miami area, a lot of it was funded with this allegedly illicit money that was coming in here. It becomes very hard for the feds to figure out what's dirty and what's not dirty. So when cases are actually proven, everybody takes notice. One of the cases that recently got some headlines down here, and your article obviously had an impact, as they have other articles. And there's a new book out called Hotel Scarface, done by a acquaintance of mine called Robin Farzad.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about it because it just sounds amazing. But keep going.
Yeah, so occasionally a documented case will come up where the money laundering is it's on the record. So most recent case where everybody documented it was with a group called Los Miami. And I didn't study this, but I sort of I monitored it, if you will. There were 2 brothers out of Madrid, Spain, and they were effectively the go-betweens between Colombia and Western Europe in terms of bringing the cocaine in, according to press reports. So what was happening is the 2 brothers they enjoyed the Miami lifestyle. The parking spaces were bigger. They could drive the fancy cars. They weren't going to necessarily be looked at and maybe criticized for spending lavishly like maybe you would do in Europe. So one of the brothers decided he was going to live here in South Florida, and the other brother was going to maintain his residence in Madrid, and they were going to kind of run things. So the feds end up executing a search warrant and ultimately an arrest working in unison with Interpol at the same time, simultaneously took down both brothers. And one of the brothers who got taken down, the Miami brother, he was taken down at a project called the Continuum on South Beach, which is some of the most expensive real estate around. So the feds come rolling in. They got local law enforcement. They got others. They come in there. They arrest these guys. There's supposedly stories of cash being hidden in the walls of the condos, yada, yada, yada. Well, at the end of the day, before this gentleman was ultimately convicted and sentenced to multiple years in prison, what they were able to sort of figure out is that this gentleman was using some of the proceeds from the cocaine business to go ahead and buy a bunch of condos in and around South Beach as well as greater downtown Miami. And obviously, once the feds figure it out, they moved to seize the assets. So a number of condos got taken down, and in the indictment, which is public record, you can see all the different towers where condos were purchased from a variety of different developers using this cocaine type of money. So it always makes for a very fascinating read. But typically you don't see this stuff until the market goes sideways. So as we begin our downturn of the current cycle, I would expect that you're going to start to hear some very interesting stories going forward. Although I will tell you the Fed's decision to impose this rule where any residential real estate that's purchased for $1 million or more in cash and previously Panama paper type of strategies were used where somebody could set up a corporation in Panama, buy something, and you never knew the owner versus today the owner has to be documented or identified. Chances are that's already spooked away and scared away some of the would-be money launderers, at least from South Florida. That doesn't mean they're not playing in Orlando, Jacksonville, other parts of the country, but I think they're taking a different approach now when it comes to South Florida.
Interesting. So what about, I don't know if you can talk about this, but when I was here and writing about this 4 or 5 years ago, I actually stayed at a Trump property up in Sunny Isles where there's a lot of Russian money. And, I mean, it's clear that Trump, well, I shouldn't say it's clear. Based on what I've seen in Miami and other parts of the world, Trump does not specialize in due diligence when it comes to investors in his condos and properties. And I guess, you know, he's not always legally required to do that. In some instances, he's just, offering his name, so he's got a branding deal. In other instances, he's had a more direct role. I don't know about Miami, but what about Sunny Isles? Maybe you can talk about that, and I don't know if you can talk specifically about Trump properties, but, I mean, it's been reported, including by me, that a lot of dirty money from Russia and Eastern Europe flowed into Sunny Isles. And in other parts of Miami, of course, I mean, I guess it's probably predominantly legal and or clean and dirty money from Latin America. But talk to us about Sunny Isles a little bit if you can.
Okay, so if we go back to the 90s when the Soviet Union busts apart, Berlin Wall comes down, things start to happen, there's plenty of opportunity, plenty of money to be made, or at least the idea is there's plenty of money to be made in Russia. Well, at the time, there were some real estate developers who basically put their salespeople on planes, and they flew them over to the former Soviet Union to try to peddle product. So this is in the mid-90s or so. 2 buildings were effectively identified, and there was a book, if memory serves me correct, it was Red, White, and Blue, it's what it's called, and it's about the Russian money moving, the Russian mafia moving into the United States after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So on this particular, case, what you had is these developers went to Eastern Europe. They went ahead and sold the product, and this they claim was the start, planted the seed, created the incubator for a number of Eastern Europeans moving into effectively northeast Miami-Dade County as well as southeast Broward County. So there's a project up there. Shortly thereafter, the Trump Towers were brought online. They were delivered. And the thing is, the apprentice program was just getting started at the time. And I still remember at the first Trump project down here, 3 towers, one of which is a condo hotel. The other 2 are straight-up condos. They actually had a tryout for the apprentice program where I remember driving to work. I was living up in southeast Broward at the time, driving past a line of people queued up in order to go in there and try to get on the apprentice program. So they were using the brand over and above. Trump had, as far as I know, and you never know the details of the contracts and how the license agreements work, but Trump's brand was being used as a way to differentiate, a typical condo building from another condo building. When you're in South Florida, all the condo names, they always have sea or marina or bay or water, some generic BS name. But as we know, if you put a brand on it, suddenly it's going to sell for much more rather than something that is simply a generic. So Trump was very early in identifying that, as were some of the local developers, and they basically hit the market at the right time. We're able to build 3 during the previous cycle. As the cycle proceeded and continued, they decided they were going to throw up another 3 right down the street, another 3 towers. So now we're talking 6 towers, roughly. Normally a tower in South Florida is 300 to 400 units, so you can run the numbers. And then from there, Trump really parlayed it. He went into Hollywood, which is just north of Sunny Isles Beach, which the area you're talking about. And then also, too, he launched there. I think his name is associated with 2 projects in the Fort Lauderdale area. Went to Tampa, went to Panama, went all over. But effectively, Trump lends his name. He comes in, he shakes hands, kisses babies. I don't know how much he's actually involved with the day-to-day development, other than putting in place some certain requirements that ensure that there's a certain level of I guess quality is a word you would use, and I say that facetiously, as well as making sure he's going to get paid.
Right. So,
but if I can mention, though, it's something important to keep in mind, especially if anybody's looking for a condo. Just because you buy into a tower, whether it has a Trump name or any other name, you need to understand that that name isn't permanent and it doesn't stay. It stays as long as the licensing agreement is adhered to. For instance, there was a project in Miami Beach called the Canyon Ranch. Canyon Ranch was put in place. If anybody doesn't know it, it's a holistic type of resort area. They have one in Arizona. They have one in New York, upstate New York. And effectively, the project had some issues, went into the federal legal system, and a bankruptcy court judge basically terminated the Canyon Ranch licensing agreement with this particular project. And as a result, the project, which people had purchased into thinking it was the Canyon Ranch and paid a premium for the brand, suddenly came to realize that they now suddenly had something called a Carillon, because the Canyon Ranch brand could no longer be used because the licensing agreement had ended. So just because you're buying a name-branded condo doesn't mean it's always going to be that, and it can disappear overnight. And with that, so does your valuation.
Okay. All right, let me just change. I'm going to ask you one more question about real estate. But there's another big industry in the Miami area, the strip club industry. And my understanding, the strip club industry is pretty big here and pretty interesting. So in any case, do a lot of deals, real estate deals go down? Let me just ask a couple of fast questions now and wrap this up.
Okay.
But what about, I want to talk quickly about baseball. Tell me 2 things. Just why do you love baseball so much? And you've got a really interesting theory that we were at a game once. We were at a Sunday game.
Okay.
You, my son, and I, and some other, I can't remember who the 4th person was. But
I think it was the legendary Boca John. I think it was the
legendary Boca John. I believe you are correct. So we were at a game. It was a Sunday afternoon game, and I think they were playing the White Sox, and the White Sox just sucked. I mean, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but I think they were dropping fly balls. They looked like they were asleep at the wheel. And you said, and I don't think you've actually run the numbers on this, but it'd be really cool to run those numbers, that visiting teams that come to Miami play like shit on Sunday afternoon, because Saturday night they're out partying. Maybe it's strip clubs, maybe just your run-of-the-mill nightclub, but they're out partying in Miami. They don't know how to handle it. There are these young guys that come down here, and they get trashed. They drink too much, and then they can't play for a 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon game. Is that? Am I remembering that right? And tell us a little bit, expand on that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, the White Sox did suck, and they still suck. But I say that with full disclosure that I'm a Cub fan. So I grew up on the north side, so the south side team I don't agree with. Anybody who tells you that they like the Cubs and the Sox, White Sox at the same time, they're not really a baseball fan. They're more of like an observer rather than a fan. So it's kind of like a difference between a traveler and a tourist. So that's what I would say first and foremost. But I have not run the number on Sunday games. I haven't run the number on numbers on games, professional sports, back-to-back games, if you will, for anything. But generally speaking, what happens is as professional players, and this is my hypothesis, and it hasn't been proven, but I'm sure it could be, many of the professional athletes, they come to town, and they go out and party. Now let's compare and contrast. Now, if you come to Miami, the bars close at 5 in the morning. Some are open 24 hours. If you go to Fort Lauderdale, which is about 20 miles north, all the bars close at 2 a.m., and effectively last call is 1:30. Now, typically, if you're going out of Miami, you don't really want to go out before 11 because nothing really starts until midnight. Now, compare and contrast that to maybe like a place like Denver. Compare and contrast that even with New York City to a certain degree. So people come here to party, and as these professional athletes are on the road and they're going around, many of them I've heard like to basically go out and burn the candle on both ends, if you will. And inevitably, what happens is the following day things tend to go sideways. And they don't perform as well as they normally would, to the point where this book I was referring to, Hotel Scarface, they document a case where a convicted drug dealer basically took out the former great running back of the Dallas Cowboys, Tony Dorsett, and this is according to Hotel Scarface, took this convicted cocaine dealer who has a restaurant in Miami Beach, by the way. He's in there, he did his time, he does what he does, now he runs this restaurant in Miami Beach called Fifi's, right up there in the North Beach area. But effectively, this, according to the book, this particular convicted drug dealer, what he did is he took the great Tony Dorsett, running back for the Dallas Cowboys, took him out partying the night before a game. Lo and behold, the following game, Tony Dorsett has just a miserable performance. After the game, the convicted drug dealer is high-fiving one of the star wide receivers for the Dolphins, and Tony Dorsett sees that and approaches the convicted cocaine dealer. Dorsett didn't know it at the time, according to the book. But there's a crystal clear example of how the partying can sort of get out of whack, and it plays a lot of times to the advantage of Miami athletes and Miami teams.
I love it. I bet I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts, as we old people say. That. So Monique Miles is the amazing co-host of Washington Babylon, and as opposed to introducing her and talking about her, let me ask her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monique Miles, and I'm originally from California. Have lived in the Northern Virginia area since '89. I'm a civil rights lawyer and human rights advocate. I've been involved, surprisingly for most people, on the Republican side since 1995. And I really enjoy working with the youth and being an advocate for them here in the Alexandria and D.C. metropolitan area. So I look forward to this show and being able to share some different opinions and perspectives with my co-hosts.
Great. And let's now go to our very, very special guest. I genuinely am thrilled and grateful that you're on, Carlos Ron. Charlie, as I call you, because you are a good friend of mine, and I should disclose that. Transparency is everything in journalism. Carlos, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ken. Well, I am right now the chargé d'affaires of Venezuela here in the United States. Besides that, I would say, I was a diplomat before in Brazil, where I spent 4 years of my life. And prior to that, well, I also went to school here in the U.S., actually, in Rutgers University. So it's kind of interesting to come back and in this position. And it's great to be here, this Babylon.
Great. And what did you get your degree in?
Latin American Studies.
Of course. That makes perfect sense. And I'm really excited to have you on, not only to hear your views about Venezuela and maybe a little bit about Latin America, but, you're a historian. I mean, that's how we got to know each other, really. And we share a passion for history. And also just maybe we'll talk just a tiny bit later about music and culture a little bit, because we share interest in that as well. So why don't I ask the first question then? Carlos, look, everybody knows, anybody who's read anything I've written about Venezuela knows that I am very sympathetic to the Venezuelan government and the Maduro government. And more, I would say, because I met Hugo Chavez, the the former president. I'm a huge fan of his and just think he's a great inspiration for Venezuela and Latin America. But not everyone shares that opinion, of course, especially here in the U.S. So I wanted to ask you, I'm sympathetic, but a lot of the audience may not be, to the Venezuelan government position. Tell us a little bit about President Maduro. And, I also would ask you, I don't think you would do this. This is probably going to have to be edited, but I want to hear the pro-Maduro argument, not the anti-opposition argument. What is positive and good about President Maduro and his government?
Okay. Let me start by saying I think I have to start by talking about President Chavez a little bit, just because I think one thing is sort of part of the other, or a continuation of the other. I mean, when President Chavez came to power in Venezuela, we were basically frustrated at a two-party system that was immensely corrupt and had taken, like many other Latin American countries, had taken the position towards neoliberal economy, free markets, privatization of most of the Venezuelan enterprises, and at the same time there was no social network that would somehow help the wide majority of Venezuelans who were in poverty. President Chavez came in with a very distinct message. One of we have to participate in our politics. We have to participate in our democracy and make sure that this that we take over our own destiny. So the first thing they have to say is that when Chavez ran his platform, it was about democracy. It was about deepening democracy. It was about enfranchising people that had never been actually been considered before as as a real part of Venezuelan society. 18 years have gone now. President Chavez is gone. He unfortunately fell to a very aggressive type of cancer, and then. And obviously, I'm running through this history, but then President Maduro comes out. He had been part of President Chavez's cabinet for a while. He was foreign minister, but prior to that, he was in the National Assembly as the president of the National Assembly, and even prior to that, he had been a trade union leader as a former leader of the bus drivers of the Caracas Metro, and he became right before President Chavez went into his last medical treatment. He said, well, if something happens to me, I think the one person that has the qualities to lead this movement forward and run as candidate for the Bolivarian revolution would be President Nicolás Maduro, or would be Nicolás Maduro at that time. And I think it was a very well thought out idea that President Chavez had, because I've had the opportunity to meet him personally and work personally when he was foreign minister, and I was in Caracas working in foreign relations for the presidency. He's a very intelligent man. He's somebody that listens. He's somebody that likes to get others' opinions and perspectives, and ponders and acts on that. And again, I think it's very important that for Venezuela to finally have a leader that comes from the labor unions, that comes from the popular sectors, and that experience some of the hardships that Venezuela's traditional elite has never even dreamed about, and has faced a very difficult time, not only politically because of the death of President Chavez and the impact that had on the country, but also that came along with a sharp decline in oil prices. And as you know, Venezuela is mostly dependent on oil production for its income. We lost about in the last 3 years, we've lost about 80% of our revenues just because of the fall of the price of oil itself. So you can imagine how that can affect a country like Venezuela, and to be there guiding the process, still as deepening or asking for deepening of democracy during this hardship, despite the attacks from outside, despite the attacks from an opposition, again, who has been always since last 18 years trying to overthrow the government, violently trying to find a way to unconstitutionally depose the government. President Maduro still has the strength to stay there and maintain his leadership, and that's something that I think it's amazing and that I'm proud of.
That's a really interesting reply, and it's good to hear a positive, not a defense, but an explanation of your support for the government. Monique, do you want to ask some questions?
Sure. You went to Rutgers University and you studied, did you say Latin American studies?
Yes.
Okay. And what was it in particular that you, did you have to write a thesis paper on anything when you were there?
Yeah, I actually did. I wrote my thesis was actually on Bolivarianism as a response to globalization. I wish I would have, I wish I could do that now, because, back when I wrote it, it was really more theoretical than anything else, because President Chavez had only been in government for about 2 years, and basically, there was nothing. There was only a few things to talk about as concrete accomplishments, but there was some theories or some inspiration in the work of Simón Bolívar, who was our independence hero from the 1800s. And that I think was important. Going back to the idea of regionalism, of how how Latin America should come together and as a region that has similarities, strengthen its own bonds so that it could then face the rest of the world as a united collective. And so many of these things were actually picked up and updated, so to speak, by President Chavez and by President Maduro today, and it's kind of been one of the backbones of the Bolivarian Revolution. The idea that regionalism was important. When on the last couple of years, we've worked strongly on regional integration and new types of integration. There's the Bolivarian Alliance, ALBA, which is interesting, composed of several nations, including Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and some countries in the Caribbean as well, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, and so on. One of the things that I think is strong about this type of organization is that rather than make trade the primary point or focus, the focus was how we can complement each other, how can we treat each other with solidarity. And I'll give you just one very basic example. Venezuela trades oil to Cuba and receives in exchange Cuban doctors, professors that have worked on the alphabetization programs, literacy programs in Venezuela, and sort of defeats that logic. Before, Cuba had to somehow sell whatever product they needed in the international market to get access to foreign currency, to dollars. And then with those dollars, whatever the sacrifice they had to do to obtain those dollars, it would be what they would need to buy Venezuelan oil. We decided to skip that arrangement and say, look, we have something you need, you have something we need. And, we gave oil, and in turn, we got, some of the best doctors in the world, the Cuban medicines worldwide recognized. And the Cuban doctors would actually work in inner city region, or even rural regions where a lot of the Venezuelan doctors wouldn't even go because pay was low, because whatever other complexities. But for the first time, we got people to have access to medicine and to doctors ever in their lives. Just because we decided that, the relationship between countries didn't have to be, a business, but rather it could be something where we, in solidarity, would complement each other.
Were you raised here in the U.S., or did you spend most of your time in Venezuela?
I spent some years here in the U.S. I went to high school and college here. Okay.
So when you think, coming as a civil rights lawyer and seeing all the things on the news, when you think of democracy and freedom of speech, would you say that the people in Venezuela on the ground have those same freedoms, or do you believe that they're trying to work toward, the government is trying to work towards providing that for the people?
I believe they do. I believe Venezuela has a tremendous amount of freedom of speech. You could go. If you go right now and you open a website, Google any type of Venezuelan news outlet, you'll probably find that about 80%. I'm not exaggerating. Will have something, some criticism of the government, on a headline. What I mean by that is that, there's space to openly criticize the government. There's always been space for that. Although, there's been a tendency to try to say, that there is some cut, or some restraint on freedom of speech. But that actually comes out of something different. What has been tried in Venezuela is to rethink the role of the media, not just as, the private property of, a media conglomerate, but rather as a public service. And by that, you need to, somehow rethink what your social role is, and the, things that what the role of government also is in access to media. For example, we have promoted a number of space for community television, community radio stations to actually, come out and start, having a space in Venezuelan's media. I don't know how to say that, but in the whole media space. Prior to this, most media was owned privately in Venezuela. Now, you have some state media, but you also have this community and local media that has a voice, that has participation in a level that, for example, for you to be accredited as alternative media, you need to have assembly of citizens that get together in a community, and that the coverage is actually from that community. And other things that were reviewed were, for example, the concessions, the media concessions. Why concessions used to be given for about 20 years to these private networks, and then they weren't held accountable for that at all. And the concessions were then decided, there was a law, and there was a whole process to review that and to decide, that maybe concessions could be given for a certain time, then evaluate, and sort of open the spectrum for other initiatives as well. That's why, obviously that hurt some of the major interest in media. It kind of took the monopoly away from them, and kind of took the long concessions. And that's why there's always been this campaign trying to say that the government is sort of limiting freedom of speech, when in fact, my belief that we've actually expanded access to media for many people.
I have to interject for just a second, because I'm loving this conversation, and this is really interesting to me. It reminds me a long time ago, when I was in graduate school, I had a German neo-Marxist professor. And I have some problems with Germans. It's not probably nice to say, but some of the great thinkers in history have been German, like Karl Marx, in particular, one of my favorites who I was reading today. As a matter of fact, I had a professor named Klaus Offa, and he talked about the concept of cognitive dissonance and how Americans, when you talk to them about healthcare, they just don't understand that in European countries still, and this was a long time ago, but you walk into a doctor's office and you don't pay, and you also don't fill out a lot of forms. And maybe may not be a perfect system, but Americans think, oh, we don't want socialized healthcare. So, it takes away our freedom to choose. Well, we have the freedom to pay a whole lot of money and to choose between eating or healthcare, and to go into a doctor's office and be jerked around and to fill out a bunch of forms and get crummy care, or many people don't get care at all. So I'm interested to hear you talk about, the media rights. And I think a lot of Americans, it's curious, I think a lot of Americans think about the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I'm not asking you to comment on this because I'm sure it wouldn't be appropriate, perhaps it wouldn't be appropriate, but I do believe that a lot of Americans are completely fed up with the mainstream press and don't really tune into it anymore, whether it's MSNBC or Fox or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Washington Times. People are fed up, and so they're looking to alternative viewpoints. But alternative make it, not fringe viewpoints, because more and more Americans just are fed up with being force-fed the news. I think we as consumers of news are very much like Soviet citizens, where during the period of the Soviet Union, Russians knew that Pravda was lying to them. They just didn't trust it, and so they looked for alternative publications, which really started to thrive during not even just the latter years of communism, but the last 20 or 30 years. So it's interesting to me to hear you talk about that, and the idea that, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the big networks have this innate God-given right to lecture us all about what's acceptable and, what range of opinion is acceptable. I don't think most Americans buy that anymore. We want to hear points of view. I know I do, from all over the political spectrum. As I said before, I'm a lefty libertarian, but I like to listen to all points of view, and I respect all points of view. So that's really interesting to hear what you have to say about the media. I wanted to ask you, if I can, one more question, and we have a little bit of time left. But I wanted to ask you a little bit also about the general situation in Latin America. And it seemed 5 years ago like there was a great movement towards left-leaning governments, democratic governments, elected governments, and that there's been some reversal of that in certain countries. And in Venezuela, I don't want to at all dismiss I'm personally not terribly fond of the opposition leadership, but a lot of people in Venezuela obviously are not happy, and I don't mean to dismiss in any way their complaints, and I want to ask you about that as well, because clearly people are suffering. It's not all like a ginned-up opposition, a phony opposition, but in Venezuela and in general in Latin America, what's going on? There seems to be a movement away from the left. Is this strictly, a result of U.S. meddling, which I do believe exists, or is it, an organic response to economic hardship as well? What is going on in Latin America?
Okay, well, that's a very complicated answer for only a few minutes, but I'll give my best shot. I think we have to look at things in terms of 5 years, 10 years isn't really that much in the history of countries, and I think that there obviously we've seen more of a conservative move in the last 3 or 4 years. Partly, I think there's varied reasons. I mean, obviously, I believe that there's always been outside interference, and that's obvious because, see, once Latin America started to solve its own or find ways to try to solve its own problems and cut its dependency from, the traditional interests here, for example, here in the United States, and by that I don't just mean the government, but I mean like the corporate interests in the United States. Obviously, that also affected, or that motivated some meddling into internal Latin American affairs. I mean, that's also, there's a long history of that over 200 years, and we could spend hours talking about that. So I think that's definitely part. I also think, the elites in Latin America have had, several years to sort of regroup and try to understand how they lost. Because until then, until about 15 years or so ago, basically the elites had no problem in controlling Latin America through democracy, to the, traditional representative democracy, given that they sort of paid off several, political parties, that, they sort of co-opted those leaders, and they did the, the dirty work. Once the population started to organize better, and you have, processes such as the, World Social Forum, or, just the coming together of social movements that sort of allowed for community organizations, for other sort of movements to, strengthen and become political forces with electoral presence, then you start seeing all these changes. I mean, you see, for example, Evo Morales coming to the presidency in Bolivia out of, the labor unions of the coca planters and with the help of the miners and so forth. You see Lula coming into power in Brazil, also with the Workers' Party, with a strong labor union presence, and social movements such as the landless movement in Brazil, supporting that. So all of a sudden you see that the continent started shifting to, making use of the democratic apparatus by these social movements. And then all of a sudden you see that the people that became leaders in Latin America started to look like their own people. Now it wasn't just that the elites that were pretty much, looked European and acted foreign, but now, you had leaders that look like their own people. I think that the right has somehow regrouped, has assessed what went wrong, has invested money into finding ways of coming back. It also hasn't helped that the financial crisis in 2008 also hurt Latin American economy, which is still basically commodities exporting economy for most of the countries. Once the prices of commodities go down, also the situation, the internal economic situation gets affected, and that's always breeding ground for political changes. But you see, if you look at the changes that took place in, for example, in Brazil, which is the largest country in Latin America, in the past year, there were changes that were promoted by a right wing who sort of cut off the democratic process and basically staged a coup against President Dilma Rousseff. I mean, the votes of some hundreds of Congress people ended up overriding 54 million people that actually voted for her to be in office. So the right wing is also finding ways to come into government that are not necessarily as transparent and as as democratic as we think. In Venezuela, for example, what they've tried to do during the last 3 to 4 years have been staging these protests in the streets. That's not to say that there haven't been any problems in Venezuela. Obviously, I said before, not having our income because of oil is definitely does create a different situation for the country, and there's hardships that we're bound to face. And obviously, there could be any other reasons that some discontent can brew. But the fact that what the right wing has been trying to do in Venezuela is to force the government out by staging these protests, by also making it look outside of Venezuela as if these are, peaceful protesters that are somehow asking for, more democracy, and then, the government's not letting them, while, nobody's telling you, for example, how many deaths are the responsibility of those protesters, including the deaths of, even people in the opposition who have been participating of these violent protests. Nobody's telling you, for example, that in the last surge of violence that took place between April and July, you've had, over 20 Afro-Venezuelans being burned alive just because their appearance was, Chavista, or they might be Chavista just because of the color of their skin. Then, you have these people come up and light them on fire. It sounds crazy, and that's what it was. It's always a way to try to bring violence up to the stage, so that you could promote a change in government, so that you can, call for intervention, call for intervention in Venezuela on humanitarian grounds, or, there's a need for somebody to put a stop to this, and so forth. So what I see now, to answer your question, Ken, and not trying to get away too much, I think there's a struggle. There's a struggle of between the popular forces that have been organized, that have, somehow tried to bring a more of a participatory type of democracy to the region. And by that I mean, to actually have the concerns of those communities, especially those traditionally disenfranchised communities, actually come to bear on the government. And the struggle between that and between traditional elites that feel that they own those countries, because, their families have owned those countries for many years, because their families have had amassed all these wealth, because, they want to be the new leaders in making, free trade agreements with the U.S. or et cetera. There's definitely a struggle between right and left that I don't think has been resolved. I think that if you look at it today, yes, you might see some countries that have been somehow turned or have gone to the right wing, but there's going to be a very important election next year. For example, in 2018, there's a new election cycle where there's going to be elections in Mexico, there's going to be elections in Venezuela, there's going to be elections in Brazil, there's going to be elections in Colombia. And I'm not so sure that they're going to go to the right. I think there's going to be a lot of surprises and a lot of tensions because the popular forces are trying to come back and make sure that what they achieved all these years is maintained and can move forward.
Well, that's interesting, and from my point of view, very hopeful. I was really happy to see the recent results of the gubernatorial elections. I always hate that word. I never pronounce it right, but the governor's elections in Venezuela, where the government party won, I believe, 17 of the 23.
18.
18. Oh, beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's even better. So let's move on to a couple of, I want to just lighten things up a little because we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, first off, you live in D.C., you work in D.C., but I want to hear you talk a little bit about living in D.C. How do you? We hang out together from time to time, never enough as far as I'm concerned, but what do you like about D.C.? Where do you like to hang out? What do you like to do in D.C.?
I don't know. I work too much. I don't know if I have any specific places I like to visit and hang out. And there's a pretty cool place in Adams Morgan, which I always like to wind down a little bit, which is it's called Café Vucon, which is a small place it has a live reggae band every night, and it's I believe it's a West African type of
nice.
I mean, it's a restaurant, so they have food. But what I really like about it is the reggae band they have playing every night. So that would be one of my places if I could probably point out one of them.
What about, because you're leading to the second question I want to ask you about, but I want to get into something in between, because I want to talk to you about Venezuelan music for sure.
Okay.
But what about Venezuelan food? Is there a place or two or three you can recommend if people want to have great Venezuelan food in D.C.?
Look, there's a whole bunch of places. I mean, there's even food trucks going around that have traditional Venezuelan arepas, which is basically our everyday, go with everything kind of food. So there's several of them. I mean, I think they're all pretty good. Although I do prefer to do that at home, because I get at home you always have this it's this homey feeling that kind of reminds you of family. I don't know, it's sort of something that comes along with some nostalgia, I guess. There's a couple of food trucks that you see. There's a place in I know there's a place in Adams Morgan that just opened up. I haven't tried it, but I see them there. There's a place in also in Union Market, and there's a few. I mean, there's some Venezuelans living in the DMV area, and I know they've opened some restaurants and so on. It's been it's part of the.
Okay, what about your favorite? What are your three favorite arepas?
Three favorite arepas.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is with tuna. My mom just always make this sort of like prepared tuna with onions, tomatoes, and just a bit of lime juice.
I love that.
And that's my personal favorite. There's the reina pepiada, which is a traditional. It's something made with like chicken, avocado, and mayo. Which is very good as well. And I would say the other one, there's this refried black beans that, you kind of put them on the side, and maybe you could, add some, white cheese on it, and that would make my day too. Mm-hmm.
And what about just, what's the one with, we've got to close, I guess, but what's the one with, it's shredded beef with a nice ice-cold Polar beer. What's that one? I'm blanking on the name of it.
Carne mechada is a shredded beef. So that's, that's right.
Yeah. So last thing, because we're running out of time. We've probably gone past time. But what about, we don't have time to talk about Latin American music, which I know we both love, but what about Venezuelan music? Can you recommend a few things to our audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's several things I could tell you about. Look, you should listen to if you want to listen to some good Venezuelan conscious music, protest music. There's definitely Ali Primera you should listen to. I mean, Ali Primera is probably our foremost singer. He was actually born on October 31st. He was a very interesting. He had a very interesting message. Old Venezuelan communist, and told the story of the Venezuelan people. You can listen to, if you want to listen to rock groups, you should try some old school Venezuelan rock. There's Sentimiento Muerto, which is by far, it's a punk, neo-punk kind of band. There's Zapato Tres, which was also more of a The Cure type of band. There's a grunge group called Dermistatu that only had one album out, but it was definitely fantastic. If you want to go for ska, which is something I like a lot, and I know you like as well. We have one great band, which is the Sort of Público. Has done wonderful work for Latin ska itself. And there was a band who's unfortunately not playing anymore, but that was actually created here in the U.S. with some Venezuelan immigrants and people from other places, called King Chango, which is a fantastic band as well. There's other new cool stuff. You should check out Los Crema Paraíso, which are also here from, there are some Venezuelans that are living here in New York. They're doing a remake of this type of Venezuelan music called Onda Nueva, which is sort of like a Venezuelan bossa nova sort of thing.
Ooh, I got to check that out.
Yeah, you have Vitualla, which is a really cool, also modern, hip-hop-ish, Afro-Venezuelan beats. That will give you a lot of music, I think, for a bit.
That will get us started, along with great Venezuelan food and Venezuelan beer. So, well, listen, we have to bring. Unfortunately, we have to bring this.
Go for the rum, not for the beer.
Definitely. So, thank you, Carlos Ron, chargé d'affaires, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, at the
That's right.
Venezuelan Embassy. And thank you, Monique Miles, for co-hosting. It was a lovely conversation. I'd love to have you back on again soon.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. Beth Hamilton, and we're here to talk to her about her recent piece and reaction to the petulant baby of Eric Zorn at Chicago Tribune, who decided to take what he called a Twitter spat to a national platform. I have noticed that we've seen this consistent trend of establishment media people punching down and punching left, particularly when it comes to left women. I have this philosophy that left women are the biggest threat to the establishment, and I'm really proud to have Beth Hamilton, one of the biggest threats to the establishment in the country. So, Beth, can you tell me a little bit about your experience with Eric Zorn?
Well, I think you've seen most of it, but I'll fill you in any blanks. I tweeted that what I thought was a pretty mundane tweet, just that, if you saw about the Russian interference, that if you can be so easily manipulated by a Russian meme, then, we need to have a better informed electorate. And he took, and I don't have the tweet in front of me. It was a little bit more intricate than that, but he took issue that because I said that they are kept intentionally ignorant, that the Americans are kept intentionally ignorant. He took issue with that and said that if I changed my tweet to they are intentionally ignorant, he would give me a coveted like. And, if I don't live for a coveted like, then what the hell do I live for? David, that as soon as I get up in the morning, I think to myself, will I get a coveted like? Not only from Eric Zorn, but from anyone. And so he tweeted that at me. He quote tweeted me. And then, anyway, I put a thread there explaining to him my position about how and I've done a good bit of research on the subject with education in this country and, how critical thinking is a problem and et cetera. And we all know, most media outlets are garbage these days. So, what I said wasn't really that, it wasn't that out of in our circle of friends, out of the ordinary, I thought. But, a lot of people on Twitter noticed it and commented and also found what he said both to be ignorant and, some people thought it was sexist, some people didn't. But, and so then he never actually responded to me. I noticed this also with my argument with Joanne Reed. She didn't actually respond to me. She would take my tweet or something that I said, and she would take also something that was sort of insignificant that I had said. For example, I tweeted 15 things about this to Eric Zorn about, and really detailing how I felt about a lack of critical thinking and, how the mainstream media doesn't really do its job in educating the electorate about, deep into the issues. And so he found some comment I made to someone who was also angry at him and quote tweeted me on that. He didn't respond to anything I said. And people came after him, even further. And instead of ever really talking to me, he wrote this article, which is exactly what Joanne Reed did on her Twitter meltdown at me. She took, she didn't take anything that I was actually explaining why I thought her points were wrong. She just, she kind of sort of accused me of being a racist and, out of touch and originally, because Jimmy Dore actually did the breakdown of that a few weeks ago, where she originally called me dear, and when I called her dear, she went off and was like, "You don't know me like that. You're not allowed to call me dear," and then Jimmy Dore was like, "You called her that first." So it's just a long line of disingenuous nonsense from the establishment mouthpieces. And so, as far as Eric Zorn is concerned, to me, writing an entire piece about a Twitter spat in a major newspaper it just underscores my point that, if you're spending your resources on this instead of actually doing something that might be of use to people in a major publication using your national platform, then that proves my point. It's garbage. So, and then I wrote a piece on him, as you know, and
to get to the fundamental crux of his piece, and he was really just discussing the Twitter spat in a very transactional way, and in a sort of petty transactional way. The interesting thing is that as a culture writer, he had the opportunity to talk about and address your fundamental point of your tweet, which was that there is a problem with the media informing people. He did not do that. And I think the interesting thing about his tweet, and I think the quote was, "There has been no more epic self-own than Eric Zorn's piece."
No, and that is why
he used his platform not to inform or to address a substantive and important issue, but to
and that's why I called
down.
the piece that that is why I called. There was nothing else I could call the piece I wrote about him than a portrait in self-owning. Because, my God, that's all. It was just, again, and then he was like, "Oh, my first Twitter spat." Like, what? Okay. It hurts my brain to think about this entire thing. But,
somebody's got to be his first, right?
Well, no, but I wasn't. He got into an argument with Wayne Gladstone.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine. He's a writer. You know him, the Internet Apocalypse. He's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Very
Great
gifted writer. He's the one who did the Feel the Burn challenge during the primaries. He's a good lefty. And anyway, the point is, Eric Zorn and he got, and I remember seeing this, got an argument where they were going back and forth, and it was definitely, under Eric Zorn's radar, a Twitter spat, and I find it interesting that he didn't feel the need to write an entire article about Gladstone, but he did about me, and he also didn't offer Gladstone a coveted like, why? He didn't feel.
The flaccid sort of response that he
flaccid
gave.
Is such a good word.
Flaccid is absolutely the response. Because, you think that, I think the problem with people like Eric Zorn, I think the problem that, people like Joanne Reed represent in a lot of ways, is that we as a country think of the media as a meritocracy. We like to think of everything as a meritocracy. And you see someone who's making a good, valid point get talked down to by a person making a dumb point. And it really makes that media facade fall apart. Yes. And I think, if you really dissect where we are at this point in history, even during the beginning of the Obama campaign, we didn't have Twitter. Facebook was just beginning. I'm talking back in 2008. It was very easy for the media to control the narrative. And I think it drives them insane that there are so many voices with a large platform. I've gathered a good amount of Twitter followers over the past several years, and they don't like that somebody, whether it be me or Gladstone or you or Mary or anybody, or Jeff Miami, they don't like us we are such a thorn in their sides, and they don't want it. And the only thing they can do, it's like what they did with Bernie supporters during the primaries, is to smear us, belittle us, talk down to us, try and make us look crazy. And that's why no matter what we do going forward, we have to work extra hard to, I don't know if the word is to be polished, but to present ourselves as well-informed and as rational as possible. Because their whole thing is, we're the grown-ups in the room, and, oh, look at these silly progressives. They're so emotional. They're gaslighting us constantly. You know what I'm saying? I know I absolutely do. And I think to get to that point, And I think that this is why you are one of the best voices on the left. I think that Mary Angela, who's going to come on to the call later, is one of the best voices on the left. And the reason is because you are learning how things work on a constant basis. You're integrating that into your thoughts. You're talking about what's really happening and addressing it in a cool-hearted way, but bringing that sense of humor and realness to it. And
I am the female Larry David. I don't want to brag.
I think that's wonderful.
That is who I am.
I think that essential essence is the biggest threat. And I think funny women are a threat to society in general, and that's a good thing.
Oh, honey, my whole life.
And I think you can see that in these terrible sort of misogynistic rants about women aren't funny, et cetera. Women are funny. It's just scary. It's just scary for men.
My funniest friends are female.
And the other thing is that on the left, I think women are scary because they have been taken, since suffrage, they've been taken in sort of for granted in certain issues.
Absolutely.
And when you can't take women on the left for granted, then this establishment is very scared.
And when you mean taken for granted, you mean that they, like the Democrats think that automatically they're going to get our vote. Is that what you mean? Taken for granted?
That plus that you're going to take it hook, line, and sinker.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, did you see a Noah's article today? The Way with the Noah, you know who she is, obviously. But her article today about people of color was very, very much on that vein today. That that they're trying to erase leftist activist voice, people of color. And I feel like there's a similar connection with women on the left and with people of color on the left, that they assume that we're going to act a certain way, that will be malleable, and I think it drives them insane when we say, no, I don't agree with you, and here's why. And rather than having an intelligent conversation about why we don't agree, then it resorts to smears and talking at us rather than with us, which is exactly what Eric Zorn and Joy-Ann Reid did. They both of them refused to speak with me. They just, wrote a piece about me, and Joy tweeted about me, not speaking to me. Because I honestly believe if Zorn had replied to me on that thread in real time, he knew he would have lost the debate. Period.
I think he not only knew that, but he was so threatened by the fact that he knew that he had to take to a national platform to
have a man tantrum.
To have a man tantrum. And and I will be honest with you, it's like I'm a man, full disclosure.
Wait, what? Oh, you didn't tell me you were a man at the beginning of this call.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I'm 6'5", 250, beard.
Okay, well this changes everything. I have to go. I gotta go, David.
But what
is David a boy's name? I don't know. I'm confused.
I don't want to misgender myself, but what I am going to say is that what I've learned is that the more I've listened, the more powerful women have become in my mind. And
that's true.
I think that when people are forced to listen, it can be very scary for them if they're not acknowledging that that's there in the first place. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. And I think that, this entire Russian scare and, labeling people as being a Russian. Do you know how many times I've been accused of being a Russian bot just because my ideas are to the left? And it's, I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago with Jeff Miami Gator when he did that little quick recording when the guy accused him of being a Russian bot, and he's like, "You caught me. I'm a Russian bot right here in Florida."
And the interesting thing about Jeff, I really have sympathy for Jeff from Miami, and just for the people who don't know who are listening in, Jeff from Miami is the actual Democratic activist who's worked within the party, very, very much on the grassroots level, in a way that people.
He has wallowed in the mire.
He's not a collectivist. He's deep in there. He's door knocking. He's doing all the things. And
he's doing hard work.
I have a lot of sympathy for him because I was a Democratic committee person for probably 6 years. I ran for the state house in Pennsylvania.
I'm one right now. I'm a Democratic committee person right now, and my
not
local,
a Russian bot.
No, I'm not a Russian bot, and I'm telling you, my local DEC is a mirror of the national. It's a mess. It's a mess. But I cut you off. I'm so sorry. So
No, not at all. Not at all. But what I'm saying is that these are people who are really engaging, and you're seeing online people who just log in, #resist.
Yes.
And then and then they treat people who are doing the real work like we're spies.
Yes. And this is what I'm talking about with critical thinking. There is what are you resisting? When you ask half of them what are you resisting, all it is Trump. And if you talk to them about somebody like Thomas Frank, for example, who, his book Listen Liberal it should be required reading. You should have to read that book. You should have to in schools. You should have to understand what happened under the Democratic Leadership Council. That Clinton the whole under Clinton they turned their back on the New Deal. That the American worker and the American people truly at this point have nowhere to turn. So when they say #resist, I'm like you don't even understand because you haven't taken the time to educate yourself about this. And I get it. I'm talking myself into a hole here. I get it. People are working. It's that's the whole thing. If you have an electorate where people are working 2 jobs and working for minimum, then that's one thing I said to Eric Zorn. And they don't have time to arm themselves with the facts. They're exhausted, and this is by design. This is when you have people that have time and can think about these things and read the information and, not be chasing their tail constantly, you're going to have the people that are awake and wanting to work for change. But I feel, in fact, I know it's by design that in our country that, we're constantly worried about health care. We're constantly worried about, student debt. We're constantly worried about all these things. And when you have people that are constantly worried about all these things, you don't have people that can take time to really, take that extra time to inform themselves. And so I feel like when I'm, largely when I'm talking on either Twitter or any other, or even in real life when I'm talking to folks, so many times I feel like it's falling on deaf ears. And I don't know if it's because they've listened to Joyanne Reid or what has happened for so long that they think what I'm saying is so out there that most of the people don't even understand what happened during the during the 8 years of the Clinton presidency. So I guess it's education. I guess it's critical thinking. But I still can't help it to be somewhat infuriated when I argue with people that I know are really smart folks in other ways, and you talk to them about this, about anything on like Bernie Sanders or anything that's on the left, and a wall goes up. And I don't know how that's happened in our country, that we have a Democratic Party that's singing the praises of George W. Bush and vilifying someone like Bernie Sanders. How did that even happen?
Just to pivot, because I think you're making one of the most important points that I think Mary Angela, who's going to come on later, has made in DC Babylon in her articles. Mm-hmm. The Suburban Mom Tells All.
She's fantastic.
Sort of series is that there has been a sort of deliberate training of the Democratic electorate to expect less from their politics.
Oh, sure. That's true.
And one of the things that I thought was very interesting today, and I knew that I would be talking to you today, was the release of the Donna Brazile article.
Oh, yeah.
And the Donna Brazile article really, really struck me because, I've been sort of more on the inside maybe than some of the people in our sphere on Twitter have been on Democratic Party. I was a candidate. I was in the committee.
I didn't know
ran
that.
the Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I ran the Pennsylvania Young Dems. I worked in the Beltway. All those types of things. But I came to my politics from the fact that I'm from a small steel town in Pennsylvania, and I understand the struggle that people go through, and I see people suffering from not having health care. But seeing Donna Brazile, who I've always admired, and I had some problems with last year, of course, but I've always admired Donna Brazile as a person, as an activist, as someone who goes back to the Rainbow Coalition, and who has been really good at pushing the party left, really bare her soul today. and I wanted to just briefly talk to you about what you thought when you read that article today in Politico.
The first thing I thought was, okay, I have to say this, in the consistent news storm that is our lives now, the first thing I thought was, am I really reading this? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I couldn't, here's why. Because I thought to myself, wasn't it just 2 weeks ago that we were all really angry? And I'm still, I don't, the whole thing with her on the, is it the rules or the ethics committee? Because I always,
so there's the rules committee, there's the unity committee, and then they appointed recently the ethics committee. And just for DC Babylon podcast listeners, we will also be including a interview with Tina Desiree Berg on the tail end of the Reform Committee, the Unity Committee meeting that they had in Las Vegas, and some of our reactions to that.
Okay.
So it is the Rules Committee. Yep.
Yeah, so it is. So my initial reaction to it was disbelief. And then I thought, what's the real story here? I don't know. And that's, I'm very careful because I know there's so much to unpack on a daily basis with what we're being bombarded with. So I'm always very careful to not trust the first thing I think. Do you know, at this point, so when I saw her bearing her soul, I thought, is this real? Because it sounds like you know Donna Brazile a lot better than I do. I mean, clearly you have a history of, you said you had admired her. I don't know a ton about her, actually. But when I saw that today, I thought the first thing that's going to happen is the Clinton folks and the Hillbots are going to find a way to either, blame Bernie, downplay this, ask us that we don't, relitigate the primaries. And that's exactly so far what I've seen today. I mean, I know that Joy Reid just put out a string of tweets, trying to, I saw Mary's tweet earlier today about that. So I would say that my first thoughts were just, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Disbelief is what I'm trying to say, David. Sorry, I'm rambling, but disbelief. No,
I think that's legitimate. And this is the discussion. So I just for background, I am also producer on the Michael Brooks Show, and Michael Brooks and I talk about different political issues all the time. And one of the things I've always said, and he said, is like, Donna Brazile is, regardless of what you think about last year, and last year is the year that broke all of us. It broke everybody in every spectrum of the Democratic Party.
Yes, it did.
We all, in different ways. And regardless of what you think about Donna Brazile, is that prior to that year, she has been generally a force for good in the party. And it was very hard to see her in that situation where she was stepping in for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She had to carry a lot of water for a lot of different people. And to see her get some liberation as someone who's been a lifelong Democrat has been really, really, it made me feel good for her in a lot of ways.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So, I
know that the reaction has been different across Twitter, but I'm just going to say that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, the thing is, I think we're all, especially those of us on the left who fought so hard for Bernie in 2016, and really it was, like you said, it was heartbreaking. The entire, and then it's I think in some ways we're all licking our wounds and recovering in some ways. I know we've all, in other ways we've moved on, but so when you see a story like this, and that in the back of your head, like, oh, she gave Hillary the questions during the debate, and she was fired from CNN and blah blah blah, and so you see this today. But I didn't know, honestly, the backstory with Donna Brazile. So it sounds like that she could have had, from what I'm hearing, a crisis of conscience. My question to you is, what do you think is going on inside the DNC in light of this today? Do you think they're scrambling? Do you think, what do you think's happening?
It's interesting because the DNC is an interesting organization overall because it's multiple layers. You have the people who work there as just lifelong staff in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Who people who've been working there. There's people there's guards at the door. I mean, it's one of those things where it's just it goes from a very basic sort of functional level of the day-to-day operations all the way up to political strategy, communications, and things like that. And what I'm thinking today is that most of the people at the DNC probably knew what happened in some way.
Right.
But we're not in a position to do much just because of the situation. And I think that many of the on the DNC probably also knew that they really were not allowed to be as political as they want, which is really interesting because it's a political party. Mm-hmm. So there's probably people who step back from the primary.
A political party is no place for politics, David. What? Come on.
No, I mean, but just think, that is like a David Lynch movie. This
entire, forget it. It's all a David Lynch movie at this point.
But just to go back to your fundamental point is that a political party is no place for politics. And what had happened, I think, over time is that because of this situation, people were neutered in a way. And they just knew that they were supposed to shut up. And they probably put their head down and did their work because they were good Democrats. And that's why I have some sympathy for the people in the DNC in a way that I know a lot of people outside of the Beltway don't.
Well, your experience is unique. Well, as everyone's is, but you definitely have a unique take on that. And I certainly haven't been a candidate as you have, but I have volunteered like a maniac in my local DNC, and I am, like I said, a committee person, through the DEC.
That's a big deal. That's a lot of sacrifice.
Yeah.
So don't discount yourself.
Well, I always feel like I could be doing more. I want to definitely be a delegate next year because that's really important. I actually missed the deadline for that, but I'm sure that'll be for Florida. And I feel like one reason that a lot of people don't get involved is it's almost like a deer in headlights thing. There's so many things that you think, I want to get involved in that, and I want to do that, and this is important to me, and I got to tell you, for a couple months after Trump winning, I was sort of in a state of shock, and interestingly enough, even though I was the one person in my group of friends that said, I think he can win. And they're all like, you're insane, you're a nut. I'm like, no, seriously, I think there's something really wrong. And, I felt all the corruption and disenchantment with the Democratic Party. And so I actually, that's why on election night I was scared. I've lost my fear a lot since then. I feel like there's so many, let's put it this way: the Trump presidency, if there's any silver lining, I think it's lit a fire under a lot of people's asses to be more politically involved. If there is a silver lining, and if Hillary was president, that's a good thing at this point. I don't, so it's, you're kind of damned either way. But at least I feel like I have seen so many more people get involved in the process, and I think that's something at least, right?
One final question I want to ask you, and this is something that's come up in my discussions with a lot of feminist women, and a lot of feminist women who are Hillary fans or not Hillary fans, they had said after the election they think that if Hillary was elected, it might have been the end of feminist activism in a lot of ways. And I wanted you to react to that, and then I want to bring Mary Angelo on the call after that.
Okay, why would that be?
The reason that they had said, and this is the reasoning I've heard from people from the far left to the center and some women on the right who are pro-choice but still identify as Republican, they said that much like in the issue of Obama, when the politics of the country and the media in the country has said that since we have a black president, there's no more racism.
I get it.
The question I'm asking is, would the narrative that I think inevitably would occur, that there is no more sexism, would that have hurt the feminist cause?
Yeah, actually, I think so. I think it would have. I mean, that's a succinct answer, but yeah, absolutely.
No,
I mean, but I mean, you saw that with the Obama presidency for sure. That people are like, oh, racism doesn't exist, and clearly, if the I mean, even with the Harvey Weinstein, and if anything, we know how deep I remember what was it? Me Too was the hashtag, and it was all over Facebook, and people were sharing constant stories of either sexual harassment or rape or whatever the case may be. And I know that's only one aspect of this entire under the umbrella of feminism and women's rights, but if anything, it shows us that it's so much more widespread assaults against women and workplace nonsense, and I've been a victim of it. I'm not going to go into all of it, but I've had my fair share of horrible behavior and with bosses and college professors and etc. And so yeah, no, I think that's a valid point for sure. I think that if Hillary would have won, I think there would have been this whole there's no more sexism, and as we all know, that's just ridiculous in any way, shape, and form. So, yeah.
Elizabeth Hamilton, it's been a pleasure to have you on. In a moment, we're going to bring on Mary Angela Perna, who wrote a piece about your Eric Zorn exchange.
She's a soldier. She's a sister in crime. Bring her on.
Absolutely. And 1, 2, 3, Mary Angela.
Mary! Oh, my God, she doesn't love us. Where'd she go?
Wait 1 second.
Wait, I'm here.
All right. All right. Mary Angela.
My loud mouth is here. Don't relax.
Yeah.
There you are.
Get closer to the phone. Get closer to the phone. And then,
okay, can you do good now?
Oh, that's perfect.
Great. That's really great.
There you go.
So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do the same count, and then I'm going to give an introduction again, and what I'm going to ask you to talk about what motivated your piece, and then you guys can just chat, all right?
All right.
All right. So 3, 2, 1. We're here with Elizabeth Hamilton and Mary Angela Perna, special to the Washington Babylon website, has joined us, and she's going to talk a little bit about her piece, explaining sort of the situation around the Eric Zorn piece in the Chicago Tribune, and Elizabeth Hamilton. Mary Angela, if you could talk a little bit about your piece.
Yeah, so I know Beth, we're friends, and Beth had sent me, every communicate on Twitter. That's just how we all do. And she privately sent it to me, and I was infuriated once again because I saw what Joy Reid had done to her. It was like a 13-tweet insanity tweet storm. And if anyone has read my work, I mean, I'm officially resisting the resistance because it's bullshit and ridiculous. Am I allowed to swear on this show?
I'm in a constant state of anger, by the way. But anyway.
Am I allowed to swear on the show? I don't know where we're
Swearing
at.
Is encouraged. Swearing is encouraged.
Okay, swearing is encouraged. All right, so that's my natural state. So,
me too.
Right. So, I mean, this to me was personal because it's not just that Beth is my friend. It's that there's a constant punching down. Like Nomiki gets it. Nomiki Const, to anybody that doesn't know, she was surrogate for Sanders. She was on the platform committee, and she was also on the Unity Reform Commission. So as Democrats, Nomiki is somebody that is very important to us as far as she's within the apparatus. And if anybody knows me, I believe in an inside-outside strategy, like get within the apparatus, as ridiculous as it is, and work outside of the apparatus to push the party left, like whether it's DSA or Working Families or whatever. Anyway, bottom line is that the resistance it's just like low info. I already wrote a piece about that. When I saw
it was wonderful.
Thank you. And when I saw, because it had to be said, because it's like that Joy Reid kind of low info. They don't know like you were talking about Thomas Frank. You don't even have to read Thomas Frank's whole book. All you have to do is Google the DLC, which was a think tank in '85.
Yeah, the Democratic Leadership Council. Yeah.
Right.
Feel free to give a little bit of background.
I'll give some background. So the DLC was a very centrist think tank that was a move away from the 70s, kind of came out of the McGovern Commission with all these people, these Democrats, that felt that, there was too much focusing on unions and labor, and they really wanted to focus on the educated class, and they wanted to focus they really wanted to kind of just focus more on the suburban, educated white voter. I don't know another way to put this. And move away from labor.
Right.
And move away from labor. Unions were a pain in the ass. Further, unions at the time in the early 70s, kind of think of like All in the Family, like Archie Bunker. Unions
How about you guys, I remember as a really little kid hearing a song in the background, look for the union label.
Right. Well, unions, but like old school union guys were socially conservative, and not only that, they were very pro patriotism. So people have to understand at that time in the early 70s, when the McGovern out of 68, and there was the McGovern Commission, that's where the super delegates came in. That's where a lot of these changes happened, and they were looking at the Vietnam War was also a major thing. Like, do we go with these kids that are against the war, but they're all going to college? Or do we still deal with these pain in the ass union people? Well, they made a conscious decision to deal with the educated class. That's what happened. So 85, that's kind of when centrist, Jimmy Carter really was the first centrist president. I mean, he did some deregulation, but nothing like Bill Clinton. And we cannot move on as a party with Hillary Clinton. This is not about silencing her. This is about saying that we truly cannot move on as a party and get back. We listen, when we say get back to FDR roots, we also need to step up. We need to say we need to include the VRA. We need to include racial justice, social justice. We need to include all of it. It's not just FDR. Right. So we need to bring LGBT rights, all of that. So we need to bring it up to today.
And the other thing is,
we need to get rid of Clintonism. Yeah. Wait, let me finish this point.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
It's very difficult for the I just call the Hillary people the resistance now. It's just easier.
Because that's true.
Right. So the resistance, they cannot. The reason they have a difficult time about reforming the party. I mean, 1,100 seats lost. I don't know what more you need to know. The party needs to be reformed. So if the reason that they're having a difficult time, and I know this because I've talked to these women, is because they can't really look at Bill Clinton's presidency. And as long as Hillary is around, then they can't look at Bill Clinton's presidency. Do you see the problem here? And the problem, if you really look at Bill, it was about deregulation, the crime bill, the 1996 Telecommunications Act was a disaster,
and welfare reform,
and the 1999 when they gutted Glass-Steagall. There's no way that you cannot look at Bill Clinton's presidency as he wasn't just the only DLCer. He was just the most successful. I used to always say that he was just don't just focus on the Clintons because Bill was just the most successful because he was president, right? But I'm actually at this point today, after what we just found out from Donna Brazile, I'm actually at the point now where I truly believe that the Clintons destroyed the Democratic Party, or it's at its worst state than probably ever. And it's because of the Clintons. I'm really at that place today. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree.
Mary,
I agree with that completely.
So anyway, I saw. Okay, so Beth had been harassed by Joy Reid, and Joy Reid is just basically a stenographer for all things Hillary. I mean, let's just face it. She gets into fights with Nomiki. She gets into fights with anyone. She's gotten into fights with me. I mean, really, Joy, you have nothing else to do, really? So there was that, and then this was during the storm. There was a big storm in Florida. What was the name of that storm, Beth? It was Irene. What was it? I'm horrible.
Oh, God. See, I don't remember.
You were in it.
Yeah, I know, because of the current climate of politics, I don't have any memory past 2 weeks ago now.
I know.
It's not my fault. It's a medical condition. It's a medical condition.
Right.
Wait, what was it called? Hurricane what?
Irene.
Whatever. I don't care.
Whatever it was. It was called
it was a hurricane.
You know what I'm calling it? I'm naming it. It's called Hurricane. Joy did a 15-tweet storm. That was insane. That was the name of the hurricane.
All hurricanes should be called Joy now.
Right, Hurricane Joy. So Beth's account got locked down for like 12, 15 hours. This is during the storm. Then then she DM'd me, I guess it was 2 nights ago, whatever it was. Now, to me, it's not just because I love Beth and she's my friend. Of course I do. But it was also about this punching down on the left. And what I've noticed, and I want people to really think about this, think about all the surrogates of Sanders. It wasn't all just women. Why isn't Mark Ruffalo getting dragged? I don't want Mark Ruffalo to get dragged, but he does. He doesn't. Notice that? Danny Glover doesn't really get dragged. Notice he doesn't get dragged? Guess who always gets dragged? Nina Turner, Nomi. Think of all the women that get dragged, and then we all get dragged. And the problem with people like you and I, Beth, is like you and I are a little more maybe visible than like some other people. Like, I don't know how this would go, but because we're on there a lot, we try, whatever. But we're not at the level of like, say, as far as visibility, say like a Nomiki or Nina Turner, certainly. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, obviously, right.
So in other words, like you and I are going to be in a situation where we're going to be harassed, and we don't really have a lot of tools to fight back. And
that's true.
This is absolutely outrageous that we are not allowed. As first of all, you and I, Beth, we're Democrats. Last time I checked. Let me look at my. I always do this as a thing. Checks her registration card. Yep, Democrat. So, you know how Beth, they always accuse us that we're not Democrats. Like we're like.
And I love when they talk to me about their activism, and you find out that they're just tweeting #resistance. I'm like, I'm actually at my DEC as a committee person working.
Right.
I actually worked my ass off during the Obama campaign. So don't tell me about the fact that because I'm a Bernie supporter, I don't have a voice. They want to erase us completely.
Right.
And you don't owe me. You don't know me.
You don't owe me.
Well, not only that, don't tell me that we as women on the left that we're not entitled to a seat at the table. I'm very exhausted.
Yes, well, and and I wanted to go back to a point you were making before, that it infuriates me that when you were saying that we care about economic issues, and of course we have to also talk about talking about taking care of identity politics. I'm sorry, because we've heard it so much now I can't think of it. But of course we have to talk about our LGBTQ issues and people of color and women. The fact that they have painted the left as people who don't care about that they called Bernie Sanders supporters sexist and racist. The fact that, subconsciously, what you had to do right now was to defend yourself, even though clearly you're with two people who know who you are and who we are. But that's what they've done to us. That's how far they've gotten in our brain that we have to say, and yes, of course we care about this, because they've smeared us so deeply.
That they I didn't think you're right. That's exactly. It's such a natural thing to like.
And they love, and that's the thing about the Democrats. They love to paint themselves as always just and moral. And I think what pisses them off so deeply is that they see people coming from the left and saying, "No, wait a second, let's really look at this." And it pisses them off that they don't have the moral high ground. And I think that infuriates them.
Well, Beth, wouldn't you agree with this? like you and I and say Jeff, and hi Jeff, you and I and people like
hi Jeff.
There's several of us, and Dave, there's several of us, and no, I would put Nomiki in this. I mean, there's several of us. I was never Dem Exit, and it's not about me. I'm party loyalist. It's just that I just know that it's not going to be a DSA-controlled Congress. I just know that. I mean, so I was always about, again, inside-outside strategy, but that's me personally. But hear me out, Bob. Hear me out what I'm going to say. The thing that they can never get with someone like me and you is they can never be like, I thought you guys were leaving Dem Exit and leaving the party. You know, that all that? You can't say that to me. Number one, I never was Dem Exit. Number two, I'm trying to reform our fail of a party. Number three, I'm actually active in the party. So I don't know what planet you're on, but I'm actually in it. And you and by the way, Beth, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
On November 8th, when you went to, I don't know, your high school, wherever you had to go.
It was a church.
It was a church. Mine was a high school. I had a reaction. I'm not going to lie to you, but did you not just hold your nose and do it?
Of course I did. In fact,
that's
and we talked about
that. They can't. Right? They can't see what. And I'm not begrudging people that did whatever they did. That's not the point. That's not the point I'm making. The point that I'm making is if you're going to come at me, and now I'm writing now. I'm writing regularly. If you and people come at me now. If you're going to come at me, you can't say to me, you know, all the talking points. Oh, you voted for Jill Stein, or you did this. No, I not only voted for her, I campaigned for her.
Yes, and I convinced a lot of my lefty friends to vote for her, and we've talked about this before.
We talked
about this. I convinced them, like, please, just vote for her. Just please vote for Hillary. Just please.
I bet. I would bet people, and they would say why, and I'd be like, look, he negotiated he did something brilliant. And by the way, Beth and David, let's all be real clear today. So since Donna Brazile decided to do a moment of honesty, let's us do a big moment of honesty here. Hillary Rodham Clinton did not walk into Philly with the required delegate count. I don't know how many times I have to say that to the resistance, but she didn't. That's a fact.
No, that's true.
That's true. Theory. That is what happened. That is the reason that Bernie Sanders was able to appoint people on a committee where it was a platform committee. What's going to be the platform for the party? That was a brilliant move on Bernie's part, right?
Yes.
So, and that's also the reason why he was able to appoint people to a unity reform commission, right? Right.
Yes.
So, so the bottom line is, number one, Tom Perez, I've given him 500 million chances. It's my party, right? So I've given him a million chances. At this point, it's obvious. Now, especially with this story today with Donna Brazile, it's obvious. They wanted, David, I think you and I were talking about this off air. You and I were saying that it's pretty obvious. I mean, that Obama, like, this is our theory, but Beth, let me just lay it out quick, and you tell me if you think this sounds, this sounds legitimate to me.
I'm humbled in your presence. Two brilliant women on the left. I'm really excited to talk to you. And I just wanted to say, in one sentence each, could you say what today's news from Donna Brazile made you feel?
Okay, Lefty Christmas. Lefty Christmas. It's Lefty Christmas, and I'm celebrating. I haven't, had a proper celebration yet, but I feel like I need to bake a cake and just show up at my neighbor's house, and they're going to be like, why are you here with a cake? And I'll be like, it's Lefty Christmas. That's how it made me feel.
Perfect. And Mary Angela?
It made me feel validated that things that we knew that made no sense, now a lot of things locked into place. And it made me feel that not only will I not be silenced, and as women on the left, we will not be silenced, but we're taking the F over the tongue.